Leaving the USA saved my life. I know that might seem like a bit of a dramatic statement to make, but when you consider the fact that as of July 22nd, 2025, there have been 237 mass shootings in the United States, and when you consider the fact that nearly 1 in 12 adults, or 20 million people in the US, owe medical debt, which of course, medical debt, or the idea of it, disincentivizes people from seeking medical care, it's actually a pretty fair statement to make. And if that's not enough for you, let's just look at the life expectancy. The American life expectancy, 77.43 years. In the Netherlands, it's 81.71. In Thailand, it's 79.68. So Thailand has a higher life expectancy than America. So just me being here in Thailand means that the odds of me living to an older age go up. In other words, leaving the USA saved my life. And in this video, I'm going to find out exactly how leaving the USA saved Adam Crompton's life. Bearing that in mind, let's go ahead and get into this reaction.
I found out that I had cancer.
Okay, so we're just getting right into it. So he had cancer. Very interested to see where this goes.
Hey everybody, I'm Adam. 7 years ago, I quit the American dream to travel to some of the most interesting places around the world.
So another really important point that I want to make about a huge difference between the US and the EU and why I really love Europe. It comes down to the basics. And one of the big basics is healthcare. And we can go on for days about the basic needs of life: education, food, water, safety, housing, transportation, infrastructure, healthcare. Let's talk about this. So I made a different video at some point. You can check it out here, talking about my health situation in the last couple of years. So when I was 30, I found out that I had cancer.
So, okay, I know I say this in a lot of videos, but it literally blows my mind that so many Americans are against the idea of universal healthcare. I just don't understand it. I genuinely don't understand it. And it's very interesting because I feel like a lot of those Americans, they think they're against universal healthcare until they become one of those 20 million adults in America that has medical debt, or until one of their loved ones becomes one of those 20 million adults who has medical debt. It's very easy to point out where someone else has been inefficient with their money, or how you shouldn't have to fund other people's misfortunes until it's you.
I found a tumor, I found a lump, and this was mind-blowing. This was scary and shocking. 30 years old. Generally, I've always lived a quite healthy life. No pre-existing conditions, no family history. Boom, out of nowhere, here's cancer. So let's look at a little bit of the difference here. My uncle and one of my other good friends, who's a physician, who's a doctor in the States, and one of my other good friends who's a physician's assistant, and one of my other friends who's in medical school, to some degree, they all kind of gave me a bit of the same message. It's a good thing that you're in Europe right now and that you don't have really any sort of copay, deductible, and that this is just going to be covered. Actually,
anytime you have actual doctors and people in medical school telling you that you are fortunate to not be in the US with your ailment, and that's where they are practicing or training to practice medicine, that tells you all you need to know. That tells you everything you need to know about the state of the American healthcare system.
there's not crazy amount of for-profit private health insurance, healthcare providers, all these hoops that you have to jump through and you have to find your way through to get the treatment and the care that you need. I found this on a Friday, got into my doctor on a Monday, got into the clinic just a few hours later on that Monday. I had surgery on Tuesday, and then I was home on Wednesday, all here in Austria, in Innsbruck. Again, my uncle, who's a doctor, who's in his 70s and has been practicing medicine for decades in the US, basically said to me, I think you really lucked out. I think it's a good thing that you had this happen to you and you really had all of your needs and all your basics taken care of here in Europe. So this is a huge thing. And this ties into, I think, the story also of how my dad passed away. My dad was 60 years old. He was basically right on the edge of going into retirement, which is young. He worked really hard, saved as much money and pinched every penny and nickel and dime he could from when he was a teenager to the end of his 50s and to about 60 years old, and had planned for early retirement. And this is also something that I think there's a big community out there. There's the FIRE community, financial independence and retire early community. This is a big thing. And back in the 60s and 70s and 80s, he was already ahead on this sort of stuff. So he was lucky. He was fortunate. He worked his butt off to be able to do it, and he retired at around 60, and had some months of a little bit of freedom that he had been planning and working hard for and saving hard for decades. Had some months of that freedom and came down with some sort of respiratory virus, something that was affecting his lungs. It was kind of plaguing him for a couple months. He had got it checked out when he first got sick, and then he recovered and everything kind of seemed fine, but there was still something kind of plaguing him with his lungs. But healthcare in America and visiting the doctor in America, you generally don't do this stuff, especially if you haven't paid off your deductible. My grandma was a.
That's a very scary situation, and that goes to show that you can do everything right. You can do everything right. You can save your money, pinch your pennies, make smart, responsible decisions year in, year out, decade in, decade out, and then you have something like that happen that comes and wipes you out. Either wipes you off the earth or wipes out all of the savings, all of the freedom that you worked so hard for. That doesn't happen in Europe. That just doesn't happen, at least as far as I'm aware. Perhaps there are some European countries that have a healthcare system more similar to America's. If that's the case in your country, please let me know in the comments. But in a country like America, whose calling card is literally being the wealthiest country on the planet, and I've learned over the past couple of years that it's not the wealthiest country on the planet, it just has the wealthiest people on the planet. Big difference there. You shouldn't have things like this happening. And look, my dad is actually approaching that age. He's approaching his late 50s, early 60s. In fact, I think he's closing in on 60 here in the next couple of years. And I will say, if I'm just being completely honest and vulnerable with you, that it does scare the absolute hell out of me knowing that these sorts of things can happen to either one of my parents. And because they're in America, they're not going to have access to the care that they'll need, at least at a reasonable cost. Now, basically, the way that health insurance works in America, at least to my knowledge, because I never actually had health insurance there because I wasn't trying to waste my money personally. But in America, more often than not, if you want good insurance, you have to get that through your job. So you get health insurance through your job. And the reason why this is problematic is because a lot of jobs, or really all employers, are at-will employers, meaning that they can fire you at any given moment for pretty much any reason at their discretion, as long as it's not discriminatory. And again, this doesn't really bode well for peace of mind, in my opinion, which probably contributes to that lower life expectancy in the US than in the Netherlands, in Thailand, and in many other developed or developing countries in the world. It just doesn't make sense that you have a system that's predicated on you being fortunate enough to have a really good job, which in many cases will actually stress you out so much because that good job requires you to work so many extra hours that you end up putting yourself into an early grave anyways. So that's really the cycle that a lot of Americans find themselves in, or they just thug it out like me and go without health insurance. Not a really good spot to be in at all.
And they had this kind of take care of yourself, don't worry about it, just rest, eat, sleep, and live well, and you'll be fine. So he was resting, taking it easy, and got sick on a Saturday, started to not feel so well on a Saturday, and seemed like a flu, something like that. Was trying to just rest it off, take it easy at home. And then Monday afternoon was really not doing well. afraid of the health insurance in the US. So didn't want to call an ambulance because that was going to be super expensive. And so I had called my stepmom to come and get him. And it was just too late. It took a while for her to get home. With the urban sprawl of the US, it took her like 45 minutes to get home. Tried to quickly drive him to the hospital or to the doctor, and it was just too late. So, this is check and mate. This is checkmate for why I personally prefer to live in Europe than I prefer to live in the States. And I have two stories there with my dad's passing and with my own cancer story.
Honestly, I have to give him his props. I have to give him his props for being able to speak about that in such a composed manner. Because if I lost one of my parents in that way, because they didn't want to call an ambulance because they didn't want to pay for the fee, or because their health insurance wouldn't cover whatever condition they had, I'm not gonna lie, I would be at the White House crashing out. I would make sure that all the higher level representatives in the US felt my pain as well.
Of why, basically, for me at least, I think it's literally saved my life, because I didn't have to worry like my dad did about should I go into a doctor or should I not go into a doctor. I didn't have to worry about this almost at all. So when I felt that lump on Thursday or Friday when I was leaving California, and then when I landed here, I didn't second guess this at all. I said, okay, I'm gonna go into the doctor on Monday. I'm literally, because it's nearby and it's walkable and bikeable, I'm literally just going to basically, within 15 minutes of where I live, gonna ride my bike over to the doctor.
And you know what? I love that he's mentioning the suburban sprawl in the US and the walkability and bikeability of Europe, because that right there contributes to that higher life expectancy that we saw at the beginning of this video. It's no coincidence that Dutch people live longer than Americans. And a lot of people probably think it's the diet. Look, if you're Dutch, please feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but in my experience, a lot of traditional Dutch food isn't really the healthiest. I mean, hagelslag with bread, so basically chocolate sprinkles with bread for breakfast, things like bitterballen. There are a lot of deep fried foods in Dutch culture. Amazing foods, they taste really good, but not exactly the healthiest things for you. And I imagine that if the Netherlands kind of moved away from some of the more deep fried foods, that life expectancy would jump up to around 84, 85 years, but you gotta balance it out. You gotta enjoy the life you're living as well. But the point is, it's not a coincidence that they live longer. It's not just the fact that they have more accessible healthcare. It's also the fact that they probably don't need as much healthcare because they're just healthier in general. And this is statistically true in terms of the obesity rates. I made a video about that probably 6 months to a year ago. And it's also anecdotally true that people in the Netherlands simply live a healthier lifestyle across the board.
I don't have an appointment, but I'm going to tell them, hey, this is concerning. This is really somewhat serious. Can he take a quick look at this? Boom, they made that happen. And I didn't have to question, is this going to bankrupt me? Is this going to cost me thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars?
And another thing that he touched on right there that I just love is the speed of that process. There was no long wait like people like to point out with certain healthcare systems in certain countries, public healthcare systems that is. He was able to get care very, very quickly. Again, he said that he discovered the lump and got the surgery within a 1 to 2 week time span?
That's what my dad was thinking. He had planned for his retirement for decades, for many years. He had planned for this. And he knew that potentially, and this is the scary thing for a lot of people around the world, not just in the US, but one false move, one misstep, one little mistake, and you can lose your life savings. You could be bankrupted. I mean, my dad even had insurance, but still he was afraid of it. And you hear, and I'm sure, and I know he did, you read and hear all sorts of stories all the time that talk about these nightmares that people go through. And he didn't want to mess around with that. So better just not to go. I had that peace of mind that he didn't have. And that's because it was intentional for me. After he passed and after I saw how that situation played out, it was clear to me, I don't want to live in a country where I don't have accessible and affordable healthcare. or accessible and affordable transportation or education. Those are basic foundational human needs. And
It blows my mind, again, that Americans don't see that as a basic human need. Healthcare, that is. It doesn't really make sense. And there are so many contradictions, so many logical fallacies in how Americans think in terms of, for example, making abortion illegal in a lot of states, but then not wanting to subsidize college education. That's a logical fallacy, because if you're going to force people to put children into this world, then you need to be willing to pay for their education. That is common sense, in my opinion, but clearly common sense is not so common these days, at least stateside. If someone gets shot and they need medical attention, it's not my problem, even though I'm the one who wanted them to have guns in the first place. I wanted people to have guns so that they could commit these mass shootings. But let somebody get shot, not my problem.
potentially some people could argue human rights. We have a right to these things in a developed, civilized society. So I intentionally put that on myself after he passed away, that I want to move somewhere and settle somewhere and get myself into a situation where I don't repeat the sins and the mistakes. I wouldn't say they were his sins, to be honest, but I don't fall into the same trap of my father. And I think I'm still here today thanks to learning from these mistakes, learning from this totally bit messed up, and to be honest, I think for-profit, I think it's a bit rigged system. This is one of the biggest stories and lessons as to why I personally love Europe and why I chose to live in Europe, and why I think it is one of the most humane and progressive societies on the face of this planet.
I wouldn't even say it's one of, I would say it is the most. Granted, I'm not that well traveled around the rest of the world, so it's possible that as I travel through Asia or Australia, Africa, South America, I might see even more progressive societies or potential for more progressive societies. But one thing I do know, based on my travels thus far, is that Europe is way, way ahead of the United States when it comes to the recognition of the value of human life.